Kale stood on the observation deck, his 4 long fingers resting on the cool metal railing. Below him, the blue and green world of Sylvan Prime hung in the blackness of space. It looked peaceful. He knew this was a lie. The planet was a graveyard, swarming with the enemy. The chittering swarm had overrun the Xylos Federation's colonies there. His people, with all their logic and discipline, were losing. This was why he was here on this human ship. It was an act of pure desperation. The door to the deck slid open with a quiet hiss. Kale did not need to turn. The heavy, rhythmic footsteps told him it was a human. He could recognize their walk now. It was less graceful than a Xylos's glide, but full of a stubborn confidence. "Lieutenant Kale?" a voice said. It was a male voice, calm and even. Kale turned. The human was one of the soldiers assigned to his unit. He wore the standard green and gray human combat uniform. His face was placid, his black hair cut short. Kale had studied the human files. This was Gene. "The briefing starts in 10 minutes, Gene said. His dark eyes looked at Kale, not with curiosity or fear, but with a simple, direct observation. It was unsettling. "I am aware," Kale replied, his voice a low hum. His vocal cords were not the same as a human's. He had to focus to form their sharp words. Gene gave a single, short nod. He did not leave. Instead, he stepped up to the railing and looked down at the planet. "It looks quiet. Appearances are deceptive," Kale said. "The swarm is beneath the canopy. They wait in the dark and the wet. They do not sleep. They only consume." Gene was silent for a moment. "We have things that consume too," he said finally. His tone was not threatening. It was a simple statement of fact. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Kale alone with his thoughts. The briefing room was a stark, rectangular space. A large screen showed a map of the jungle continent where they would be deployed. Kale took his seat at the front. The other members of the human squad filed in. They did not sit with rigid posture like Xylos warriors. They slouched. They leaned back. One of them, a female named Sue, offered Kale a small smile as she sat down. He did not understand the expression. Was it a sign of friendship? Or was it mockery? He looked away. The squad leader, Day, entered last. He was a broad-shouldered man with a quiet presence that filled the room. He did not speak loudly, but when he did, the other humans stopped their quiet chatter and listened. "All right, listen up," Day began, his eyes scanning the room and lingering on Kale for a moment. "This is Sylvan Prime. The Xylos fusion spire here," he pointed to a blinking icon on the map, "is our objective. Intel says the swarm is using it to power a ground-based spore launcher. They're trying to poison the atmosphere to suit their own biology. Our job is to get in, plant seismic charges at the base of the spire, and get out before it goes up." A human soldier raised a hand. "What's the enemy density, Sergeant?" "High," Day said flatly. "Very high. This is a hot zone. That's why we have Lieutenant Kale with us. He knows the swarm's tactics. He knows how they fight. You will listen to him as you would listen to me." Kale stood up. He felt the eyes of all the humans on him. Their faces were so open, so easy to read. He saw doubt on some, curiosity on others. "The chittering swarm is a hive mind," Kale explained. "They do not think as individuals. They are like the cells of a single body. They will attack without regard for their own survival. Their blood is a powerful acid. Do not let them get close. If one dies near you, its body will rupture. The acid will burn through your armor and your flesh." He paused, letting the translation software catch up. "They are vulnerable to focused fire. Their chitinous armor is strong, but it can be broken. Aim for the joints at the legs and the sensory clusters on the head. But remember, killing one means nothing. They are a tide. You must break the wave." He sat down. The room was quiet. Day broke the silence. "You heard him. This isn't a fight for glory. It's a demolition run. We get in, we do the job, we get out. Stick to the plan. Watch your corners. And for God's sake, watch your ammo count. Our evac point is here." He pointed to a clearing 10 kilometers from the spire. "Any questions?" There were none. The humans stood up and began to move towards the armory. Their movements were efficient, but they still talked to each other. They joked. One of them clapped another on the shoulder. Kale watched it all. He saw their soft skin, their lack of natural armor, their relatively weak senses. They seemed so fragile. How could such creatures stand against the swarm? He believed the High Command had made a terrible mistake. He was going to die on that planet, surrounded by these illogical, noisy beings. In the armory, Kale checked his plasma caster. The weapon felt solid and familiar in his hands. Next to him, Gene was cleaning his rifle with a slow, methodical care. He took it apart, cleaned each piece, and put it back together with practiced ease. His hands moved with a certainty that Kale found surprising. Sue, the medic, was packing her kit. She had rolls of bandages, injectors of various medicines, and a small, powerful laser for sealing wounds. She saw Kale watching her. "Just in case," she said, holding up a canister of biofoam. "This stuff can seal up almost anything, even acid burns. I hope I won't need it for that." Kale tilted his head. "Your optimism is noted, but hope is not a strategy." Sue's smile didn't fade. "Maybe not, but it's better than the alternative." Day walked past, his own gear already secured. He carried a large rifle and a massive, sheathed blade on his back. He stopped in front of his squad. "5 minutes to drop," he said, his voice low but clear. "Get your heads in the game. This is what we trained for." They moved to the dropship bay. The craft was a blocky, utilitarian thing, designed for one purpose: to get soldiers from orbit to the ground as quickly as possible. The humans filed in, buckling themselves into the hard seats along the walls. The atmosphere changed. The joking stopped. The air grew thick with a tension Kale could almost smell. It was not the serene, meditative calm of Xylo's warriors before battle. This was different. This was a heavy, palpable feeling. It was the quiet before a storm. Jean closed his eyes, his lips moving silently. Praying, perhaps. Sue held a small, worn photograph between her fingers, staring at it intently before tucking it safely into a pocket on her chest. Day just stared straight ahead at the closed ramp, his jaw muscles tight, his eyes like chips of stone. He was not afraid. He was focused. He was turning himself into a weapon. Kale felt the vibrations as the ship detached from the mothership. Then came the violent shudder as it entered the atmosphere. The ride was rough, shaking and rattling them in their seats. Through a small viewport, Kale saw the sky turn from black to a fiery orange. Soon, they would be in the jungle. He looked at the humans around him. In the dim red light of the cabin, their faces were set in hard lines. He saw their fragility, yes, but he also saw something else now. He saw a grim determination. He saw a willingness to endure the shaking, the fear, the uncertainty. They were not serene because they were not denying their fear. They were carrying it with them. This was a new concept for Kale. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. 2 minutes to LZ. It's gonna be hot. Sensors show multiple contacts near the landing zone. Brace for evasive maneuvers. The ship suddenly lurched to the side. A loud thump hit the hull. An alarm blared. They were being shot at. "Everyone, lock and load," Day yelled, his voice cutting through the noise. The humans unstrapped their rifles in unison. The sound of charging handles being pulled back echoed in the cabin. Kale powered up his plasma caster, the weapon emitting a low, rising whine. The ship dove sharply, and then with a final, bone-jarring crunch, it settled onto the ground. The ramp at the front began to lower with a hydraulic whine. Thick, humid air, smelling of rot and strange flowers, flooded in. The jungle was a wall of oppressive green and shadow. And from within that green shadow they came. A skittering, chittering sound, growing louder. It was the sound of 1,000 claws on bark and soil. "Go, go, go!" Day shouted. The humans surged forward, fanning out into the jungle, their rifles up. Kale followed, his own weapon raised. He stepped out onto the muddy ground and looked into the darkness between the trees. Dozens of glowing red eyes stared back. The battle for Sylvan Prime had begun. The humid air of Sylvan Prime was thick in Kale's throat. It smelled of wet earth, rotting plants, and something else, something sharp and metallic. The chittering swarm. The jungle was a nightmare of twisted trees and thick vines, with little light breaking through the canopy high above. Shadows moved everywhere. The moment his boots hit the mud, the world erupted into noise. From the dark spaces between the massive trees, the creatures surged forward. They were all angles and sharp edges, with hard, shiny shells the color of dried blood. 6 legs carried them in a skittering, terrifyingly fast rush. Their mouths were a mess of clicking mandibles, and their red eyes glowed with a mindless hunger. The human soldiers did not freeze. They moved. Day's voice was a calm, hard rock in the storm of sound. "Contact front. Jean left flank. Sue, stay central. Kale, watch our backs." Plasma fire, bright and green, shot from Kale's weapon. It hit the lead creature in the chest. The thing shrieked, a high-pitched sound that hurt the ears, and collapsed. Its body sizzled and popped, and a spray of clear, burning liquid shot out from the wound. Acid. It hit a broad leaf, which instantly turned black and withered away. The humans' guns made a much louder, sharper sound. Crack, crack, crack. The bullets tore into the chitinous shells of the swarm. They were not as powerful as his plasma bolts, but they were faster. The humans fired in short, controlled bursts. Kale saw Jean. The quiet soldier had moved away from the main group, finding cover behind a giant, moss-covered root. He was not firing wildly. He would wait, his rifle steady. A creature would leap from behind a tree, And in that single moment, Jin's rifle would speak. Crack. The creature would fall, a neat hole in its head. He never wasted a shot. He was like a machine, but a calm, patient Day was different. He was the center of the storm. He stood his ground, his rifle firing steadily. He called out targets. 2 on the right. Sue! Dropping 1 near you. His voice was flat, without panic. When 3 creatures rushed him at once, he didn't back down. He fired his rifle until it was empty. Then in one smooth motion, he drew a long knife from his belt. As the first creature leaped, he sidestepped and drove the blade up through its soft underjaw. He kicked the twitching body off his blade into the path of the second, and shot the third in the face with his sidearm. It was brutal, efficient, and shockingly fast. Kale had fought beside Xylo's warriors his whole life. They were disciplined. They held perfect lines. They fired in unified volleys. This was not that. This was chaos. But it was a chaos the humans seemed to understand. They did not form a line. They flowed like water, moving to where they were needed, supporting each other without being told. Sue was not just hiding. She was watching. Her medkit was open beside her. When a soldier named Min was clawed on the arm by a creature that got too close, she was there in a second. She pulled him behind cover as Jean laid down covering fire. Kale saw her spray a white foam on the wound. It sizzled for a second, and then hardened. She slapped a bandage over it and pushed him back towards the fight. You're fine. Keep firing. Her voice was firm, not gentle like before. Kale realized he had been standing in one place, watching them. A skittering sound to his left broke his trance. 2 of the creatures were coming around a thick tree, aiming for his exposed side. He swung his plasma caster, but he was too slow. One of them leaped. There was a deafening crack, right next to his head. The leaping creature's head exploded in a spray of fragments and acid. Kale flinched back. He turned and saw Jean, his rifle smoking. Jin's eyes met his for a split second. There was no pride there. No satisfaction. Just a quick, assessing look. Then Jean was turning away, his rifle seeking another target that he had saved him. Kale, a veteran Xylo's warrior, had been saved by a human. The thought was humbling and confusing. These creatures he had thought were weak and disorganized had just protected him. Their actions were not illogical. They were just a different kind of logic. A logic of the unit, not of the individual. Push forward. To the ridge. Day yelled, pointing to a rocky slope about 100 meters away. We can't stay in this kill zone. The squad began to move, firing as they went. It was a fighting retreat. They covered each other. One would run while another fired. Then they would switch. Kale found himself falling into their rhythm. He would fire a sustained burst of plasma to clear a path, and 2 humans would dash forward. Then they would cover him as he moved. They reached the base of the ridge. It was a jumble of rocks, offering better cover than the open jungle floor. Up, go, Day commanded. They scrambled up the rocky slope. The creatures followed, their claws scraping on the stone. It was harder for them to climb, and for a moment the humans had the advantage. They fired down, picking off the scrambling swarm warriors. At the top of the ridge, there was a small, flat area. They had a moment to breathe. The immediate attack had been broken. The chittering sounds faded back into the jungle. The humans immediately went to work. Jean took a position watching the way they had come. Sue checked on Min's arm again. Day looked at his squad, his eyes counting, making sure everyone was there. Kale leaned against a rock, his plasma caster humming softly. He looked at the humans. Their faces were slick with sweat and grime. Their uniforms were torn in places, but their eyes were alert. They were already preparing for the next attack. Sue walked over to him. You okay? She asked. She held out a canteen. Water. Kale looked at the canteen. The gesture was so simple, so normal. In the middle of this hell, she was offering him a drink. He took it. The water was cool and clean. He had not realized how dry his throat was. Thank you, he said, his voice rough. You fought well, Day said, coming over. He wasn't looking at Kale, but scanning the jungle below. Your plasma cutter is effective. Caster, Kale corrected quietly. It is my duty to fight well. Day finally looked at him. It's more than duty for them, he said, nodding towards the jungle. It's all they are. That's what makes them scary. He looked back at Kale. For us, it's a job we want to come back from. Kale thought about Jin's perfect shot, about Day's fierce knife work, about Sue patching up a soldier while bullets flew past. This was not just a job. This was who they were. They were not serene like the Xylos. They were alive. They felt fear and anger and a need to protect each other. And they used all of those feelings as fuel. We should keep moving, Jean said from his lookout post. His voice was quiet, but it carried. The silence is worse than the noise. It means they are gathering. Day nodded. You heard him. Let's move. Next rally point is 1 click east. Stay sharp. The humans shouldered their packs and their weapons. They moved out, down the other side of the ridge, back into the oppressive green of the jungle. Kale followed them. He no longer saw them as just fragile, noisy creatures. He saw them as soldiers. Dangerous, capable, and deeply unpredictable. He had come to this planet expecting to die with them. Now, for the first time, a small, strange thought entered his mind. He might actually live because of them. And he wasn't sure which idea was more frightening. The jungle was a wet, green prison. After the fight at the ridge, the squad moved in silence. The only sounds were the squelch of their boots in the mud, the buzz of strange insects, and the distant, always present chittering of the swarm. It was a sound that never went away. It was the sound of the planet itself. Kale walked near the middle of the group now. He was no longer just an observer at the back. He was part of the formation. His eyes, adapted for lower light, scanned the deep shadows under the leaves. He saw things the humans might miss. A slight movement in the canopy, a patch of ground that looked disturbed. He would raise a closed fist, and the humans would instantly freeze, understanding the signal. They were learning from him, just as he was learning from them. Sue walked near him. She had a small scanner in her hand, checking for biological signs. It's too quiet up ahead, she whispered to Day. Day nodded. They're hurting us, trying to push us into a trap. He looked at the map on his wrist device. There's a river up ahead. We have to cross it. That's where they'll be waiting. They reached the edge of the trees. A wide, slow-moving river cut through the jungle. The water was brown and cloudy. A fallen tree created a natural bridge across to the other side. The other bank was another wall of dense, dark jungle. It's a perfect ambush point, Jean said softly. He was crouched behind a tree, his rifle pointed across the river. They'll hit us when we're halfway across that log. We don't have a choice, Day said. The spire is on the other side. We go across one at a time. Jean, you go first. Secure the other side. Kale, you cover this side with your plasma caster. Sue, you're after Jean. I'll go last. Jean didn't hesitate. He moved like a ghost, low and fast, onto the fallen tree. The log was wide, but slippery with moss. He moved with careful balance, his eyes scanning the far bank. He was halfway across when the attack came, but it didn't come from the far bank. A huge creature, much larger than the others, burst from the muddy water directly beneath the log. It was a bloated, pale thing with massive claws and a wide, gaping mouth. It was a swarm lurker. It slammed into the log, trying to knock Jean off. Jean lost his balance for a critical second. He wobbled, his arms flailing from the far bank. A volley of sharp, bony spines shot out from the trees. The swarm was shooting at him. Covering fire, Day yelled. Everyone opened up. Kale aimed his plasma caster at the far bank, firing sustained bursts into the foliage. The green bolts set leaves on fire and exploded chunks of wood. The humans' rifles cracked, aiming at the sources of the spines. Jean regained his balance and started firing his rifle one-handed while trying to run across the slippery log. It was an impossible task. A spine shot from the trees grazed his leg. He grunted in pain and stumbled. Jean! Sue shouted. Kale saw another lurker rise from the water near their bank. It was coming for them. He swung his weapon, but he was too slow. The creature shot a glob of thick, sticky webbing from a gland on its chest. The webbing wasn't aimed at a human. It was aimed at him. The sticky strands hit Kale in the chest and arm, pinning his weapon to his body. He stumbled back, trying to tear the strong fibers. He was trapped. The lurker surged out of the water, its claws raised to crush him. A blur of motion. Day charged forward, not with his rifle, but with his large, powered blade. He roared as he swung the humming weapon. The blade sliced cleanly through one of the lurker's massive claws. The creature shrieked and turned on him. On the log, Jean was almost across. But the first lurker, the one that had hit the log, was climbing onto it now, blocking his path. Jean was wounded, trapped between the creature and the spines from the bank. Kale struggled against the webbing. He saw Day fighting the lurker, dancing away from its remaining claw and acid spit. He saw Jean, out in the open, facing a monster. Then he saw Sue. She didn't fire her gun. She didn't hide. She slung her rifle over her shoulder and ran onto the log. She ran towards Jean and the lurker. What is she doing? Kale thought, his mind reeling. It was suicide. Sue ran, her feet sure on the slippery bark. The lurker saw her coming and turned from Jean, its mandibles clicking. As it lunged for her, she dropped onto her back and slid underneath its body, like a runner sliding into home base. As she slid, she pulled a grenade from her belt, armed it, and shoved it into a soft-looking joint in the creature's underbelly. She slid out behind the creature, jumped to her feet and shoved Jean forward. Go! They both dove for the far bank as the grenade exploded. The lurker burst apart from the inside, showering the river with chunks of flesh and sizzling acid. On the near bank, Day delivered a final, powerful thrust with his blade, piercing the second lurker's head. It collapsed into the mud. The firing from the far bank had stopped. The ambush was broken. Day rushed over to Kale and used his knife to cut the sticky webbing away. "You okay?" Kale nodded, his body trembling with adrenaline. "I am functional." They quickly crossed the log to the other side. Sue was already there, kneeling next to Jean. The bony spine was still stuck in his leg. She was cutting his pant leg away. "We need to move," Day said, his voice tight. "That explosion will have drawn every swarm for kilometers." "Just give me 1 minute," Sue said, her voice calm but firm. She pulled out the spine and blood flowed. She sprayed the wound with disinfectant and then applied a thick layer of the biofoam. It expanded and hardened, sealing the wound. She wrapped a bandage around it tightly. "Okay, you can walk. Don't run on it yet." Jean nodded, his face pale but set. "Thank you, Sue." She helped him up. Then she looked at Kale. "You're sure you're okay?" Kale just stared at her. He had seen Xylo's medics. They were efficient. They followed protocols. If a soldier was too great a risk to save, they were left behind. It was logical. The unit was more important than the one. Sue had run into direct fire. She had slid under a monster. She had saved Jean without a moment's hesitation. There was no logic in it. It was pure, instinctual action. It was bravery of a kind Kale had never seen. "Why?" The word was out of Kale's mouth before he could stop it. Sue looked confused. "Why what? Why did you do that? It was not logical. You could have died." Sue finished packing her medkit and stood up. She looked him right in his large, dark eyes. "He's my friend," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "That's all the logic I need." Day pointed deeper into the jungle. "We need to find a place to hide and regroup. Let's move. Jean, lean on me." The squad moved on, leaving the river behind. Kale followed, but his mind was back on that log. He had seen human ferocity in the first fight. He had seen their skill. But now he had seen their heart. They fought for each other. They would die for each other. It was a terrifying, illogical, and powerful strength. And as he looked at Sue's back, he felt a strange, new emotion. It was not fear of the swarm. It was a deep, humbling respect. The jungle gave way to a scarred wasteland. The air, once thick with the smell of life, now carried the stink of ozone and rot. In the distance, the fusion spire rose into the hazy sky. It was a monstrous structure of metal and glowing conduits, now crusted over with the organic, hive-like growth of the swarm. Pulsating veins of sickly yellow light ran up its sides. The ground around it was bare earth, churned by countless claws. They had reached their goal. From their hiding place in the last line of trees, they could see the swarm. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They moved in a constant, seething river around the base of the spire. It was an impossible number. "The charges won't do much good if we can't get them to the base," Jean said, his voice low. He was leaning against a tree, his injured leg stretched out. Sue had given him a painkiller, but he was still pale. Day studied the scene through his binoculars. "There's a service trench," he said. "It leads right up to the foundation. It's covered, mostly. That's our way in." The trench was a deep gash in the earth, meant for cables and pipes. Parts of it were covered by metal grates, but it was their only chance. "The second we step out of this tree line, they'll see us," Sue said. "Then we'll be fast," Day replied. He looked at each of them. "This is it. We plant the charges, set the timer for 5 minutes, and we run like hell for the rally point. No heroics. We all go home." "Understood." They all nodded. Kale felt the weight of the seismic charge in his pack. It was heavy and cold. They broke from the cover of the trees and ran for the trench. It was only 50 meters, but it felt like a mile. The open ground was exposed. Almost immediately, the chittering sounds rose to a fever pitch. The swarm had seen them. They scrambled down into the trench. It was dark and damp, filled with puddles of stagnant water. The sounds of the swarm were muffled, but they could hear the skittering of claws on the metal grates above their heads. "Go, go, go," Day urged. They ran through the trench, splashing through the water. The trench led them directly under the shadow of the spire. The organic hive material covered the walls here, pulsing slowly. It was like being inside a living thing. They reached a large open area at the very base of the spire. It was a maintenance bay, now empty. This was the spot. "Here, set the charges," Day commanded. They worked fast, pulling the heavy discs from their packs. They placed them against the metal foundation, arming them one by one. The timers lit up with a soft red glow. 5 minutes. A loud, grinding sound echoed through the bay. A massive metal door, rusted and covered in hive goo, began to tear itself open. From the darkness behind it, something huge moved. Then it emerged. It was a swarm queen. She was enormous, a mountain of glistening chitin and pulsating flesh. She filled the entire doorway. Her legs were like tree trunks. Her head was a nightmare of tusks and dripping mandibles. And surrounding her, pouring out from behind her, was a wall of her warrior children. They packed the space, their red eyes fixed on the small squad of soldiers. The way they had come, the trench was now also filling with swarm warriors. They were surrounded, completely. Day looked at the timer. 4 minutes and 30 seconds. He looked at the charging horde. He looked at his squad. He looked at Jean, who was struggling to stand. He looked at Sue, who had her pistol out, her hand shaking. He looked at Kale, who stood with his plasma caster ready, but they all knew it was useless. There were too many. The queen took a ground-shaking step forward. Day's face changed. All the emotion drained away, replaced by a calm, cold certainty. He made a decision. Jean, he said, his voice eerily quiet. Take the high ground on those pipes. Sue, get Kale and Jean back down the trench. Clear a path. Kale didn't understand. A path? Sergeant, there is no path. We are trapped. Day slung his rifle. He reached over his shoulder and drew the massive, powered blade. It hummed to life, glowing with a blue energy. I'll hold them here, Day said. The words didn't make sense to Kale. Hold them? 1 man against 1,000? It was not a military tactic. It was madness. What are you doing? That is suicide. Kale protested, his voice rising. Day looked at Kale. For the first time, Kale saw a faint, grim smile on the human's face. It was not a smile of joy. It was a smile of acceptance. It's not suicide, Day said. It's buying time. He turned his back to them and faced the queen. He took a deep breath and then he roared. It was a sound Kale had never heard before. It was a sound of pure, raw defiance. It was louder than the chittering, louder than the hum of the spire. It was the sound of a man spitting in the eye of death. Then he charged. He did not run away. He ran forward, straight into the heart of the horde. The humans did not hesitate. They obeyed their last order. Jean, ignoring his pain, scrambled up a set of pipes along the wall, giving him a clear line of fire. Sue grabbed Kale's arm, her grip like iron. Come on, she yelled, pulling him towards the trench entrance. Kale was frozen for a second, watching Day. The human sergeant was a whirlwind. His glowing blade cut through the swarm warriors like they were nothing. He moved with a terrible, beautiful grace, spinning and slashing. He was not trying to kill them all. He was creating a spectacle. He was making himself the biggest, loudest target. The entire swarm focused on him. They swarmed over him, but he kept fighting, a tiny island of blue light in a sea of claws and teeth. Jean fired from above, his shots precise, picking off creatures that tried to flank Day from a distance. But there were too many. Sue fired her pistol into the swarm of creatures blocking the trench entrance, creating a small opening. Kale now? Kale finally moved. He raised his plasma caster and fired a continuous stream of green energy into the trench, burning a path. They pushed forward, into the narrow passage. They could hear the sounds of Day's fight behind them, the roaring, the shrieking, the hum of the blade. Then suddenly the roar stopped. The hum of the blade stopped. A second later, Jean dropped down from the pipes behind them, his face a mask of grim sorrow. He didn't say anything. He just started firing back the way they had come, covering their retreat. The 3 of them fought their way down the trench. The swarm, confused and leaderless for a moment, was slower to react. They burst out of the trench and into the open ground. Run! Sue screamed. They ran. They ran for the tree line. They ran for their lives. Kale did not look back. He didn't need to. He knew what had happened. Day was gone. They reached the cover of the trees and kept running. The timer in Kale's mind was counting down. 3 minutes. 2. A massive shockwave hit them from behind, throwing them to the ground. The world turned white, then orange. A deafening roar swallowed all sound. Kale looked back. The fusion spire was collapsing in on itself. A huge fireball rose into the sky, swallowing the queen and her entire army. The seismic charges had done their job. They had won. Lying in the mud, breathing in the smoke-filled air, Kale felt no victory. He only felt the echo of Day's roar and the memory of his charge. He had seen human friendship. He had seen their skill. Now he had seen their ultimate price. And he finally understood. This was the real meaning of fear. Not fear of death, but the terrifying awe of a species that would look at certain death and choose it so that others might live. The evacuation ship was cold and sterile. The air smelled of recycled oxygen and metal, a sharp contrast to the thick, living smell of the jungle. Kale sat on a bench in the medical bay, his leg wound properly cleaned and bandaged. The physical pain was minor. The other feeling, the one inside him, was much heavier. The door slid open and Sue walked in. She had cleaned the dirt from her face, but her eyes were red and puffy. She moved slowly, like she was very tired. She handed Kale a cup of a warm, brown liquid. "Tea," she said softly. "It helps." Kale took the cup. He held it in his long fingers, feeling the warmth. He did not drink. "Thank you," he said. Sue sat down on a bench opposite him. She held her own cup, staring into it. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was a silence they shared. A little while later, Gene came in. His leg was in a proper medical brace. He walked with a slight limp, but his posture was still straight. He nodded to Kale and sat next to Sue. He didn't speak. They sat there, the three of them, in the quiet hum of the ship's engines. They were safe. The mission was a success. The spire was destroyed. The swarm on Sylvan Prime was broken. They were heroes. It felt like ALIE.AN officer from the Xylos High Command entered the bay. He was tall and elegant, his uniform perfect. He held a data slate. "Lieutenant Kale," the officer said, his voice a formal hum. "The High Command has reviewed the mission data. Your actions and the actions of the human unit were exemplary. You are to be awarded the Star of Xylos for valor. The humans will also receive high honors from their own people." Kale looked at the officer. He thought of Day, standing alone against the darkness. He thought of the sound of his blade stopping. "We do not want a medal," Kale said, his voice quiet but firm. The Xylos officer blinked, his large eyes showing confusion. "I do not understand. It is the highest honor." Gene looked up. His voice was flat, without emotion. "We want to remember Day's name. That is all." The officer looked between them. The concept was foreign to him. On Xylos, the collective was everything. The individual was a part of the whole. To focus on one lost soldier was illogical. "The sergeant's sacrifice is noted in the report," the officer said, a little stiffly. "It was a tactically sound decision to preserve the mission." Sue stood up. Her hands were clenched into fists. "It wasn't a tactic," she said, her voice shaking. "It wasn't a decision. It was Day." The officer took a step back, startled by her emotion. He looked at Kale for support. Kale stood up. He was taller than the human, taller than the Xylos officer. He looked down at the official. "The human is correct," Kale said. "Your report is incomplete. It does not explain why." "Why? What, Lieutenant? Why he did it?" Kale said. "You see a soldier who died to complete an objective. I saw a man who charged an army so his friends could live. There is a difference. A very important difference." The officer was silent. He clearly did not see the difference. He made a note on his data slate. "I will add this to the record," he said, and then he turned and left quickly. When he was gone, the room felt quiet again. Kale turned to Gene and Sue. "I am sorry," he said. "I did not understand at first. I thought you were undisciplined. I was wrong." Gene nodded slowly. "We are disciplined, but our discipline is for each other, not for a rulebook." Later, Kale went to the ship's observation deck. The stars stretched out into forever, cold and bright. Sylvan Prime was just a small ball of green and blue behind them. A memory already. He heard the door open and close. Gene came and stood beside him, leaning on a cane. "He talked about you, Gene said, looking at the stars. "After the first day, he said you were a good soldier, that you were smart, that we could learn from you." Kale felt a strange tightness in his chest. "He was a great warrior, the greatest I have ever seen." "He was a good man," Gene corrected softly. "That was more important to him." They stood in silence for a long time. "I was afraid of you," Kale said, the words surprising him. "Not of the swarm. Of you. Of what you are." Gene looked at him. "What are we?" "You are more," Kale said, struggling to find the words. "You feel more. You care more. For my people, fear is a thing to be controlled. For you, it is a fuel. For my people, death is a logical end to service. For you, it is an enemy you fight for each other. You will stand against it, alone if you have to, just to give your friend one more minute of life. That is terrifying." Gene almost smiled. It was a sad smile. "Yeah," he whispered. "It is." The journey continued. Kale spent his time with Gene and Sue. They did not talk much about the mission. They talked about other things. Sue showed him pictures of her home, a place with tall mountains and quiet lakes. Gene talked about the history of his people, their wars and their art. Kale told them about the Xylos homeworld, its crystalline cities and peaceful ways. He was learning them, not as soldiers but as people. When the ship finally docked at the Central Space Station, it was time to say goodbye. The human soldiers were being sent back to Earth. Kale was being reassigned. Sue hugged him. It was a strange feeling, the human embrace. It was warm. "Take care of yourself, Kale," she said. Gene shook his hand. "Fight well, Lieutenant." Kale watched them walk away, down the corridor to their own ship. They did not look back. He stood there for a long time, alone in the busy station. People of many species moved around him, talking, working, living. He thought about the Xylo's way. It was orderly. It was safe. It was logical. But he had fought beside humans. He had seen Sue's courage. He had seen Jin's calm skill. He had seen days sacrificed. He had discovered the real meaning of fear. It was not the chittering of the swarm. It was the quiet sound of a friend offering you water in hell. It was the look in a soldier's eyes as he chose to die for you. It was the terrifying, beautiful power of a heart that valued one life above the many. And as Kale turned to report to his new commander, he carried that fear with him. It was no longer a thing that made him weak. It was a lesson, a heavy and precious gift from the humans. A reminder that some things are worth being afraid for, and that some things are worth dying for. And that, he now knew, was what made them strong.